The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and this is episode number 257. Just a reminder to please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a thumbs up. Give us a good review, not because we're looking for praise, but because we like to think that the stories that we tell and the podcasts that we do help people who are mired in the horrific pandemic of addiction. So when you do that, when you give us a good review, or when you subscribe at YouTube and give us a thumbs up, then Google likes that and Google helps people find our podcast. And that's how we can help people. Today we have an interview with an author. His name is Peter E. Murphy. And he, by the time this podcast airs, he will be like a week shy of his 50th year of sobriety after waking up in a gutter when he was 21. He's the founder of Murphy Writing of Stockton University. He has been a consultant for numerous organizations, including the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Educational Testing Service, and countless school districts from coast to coast. He is in the process of writing his memoir, which is called Once Upon a Time You Lived in a Castle. And I will be sure and have him tell us when his memoir is published. But for now, let's talk to Peter Murphy. Peter Murphy, thank you so much for being willing to tell your story on the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Jeannie, and thank you for having me.
Okay. So start back at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and what was your life like before drugs or alcohol?
Yeah. I said Jeannie, I meant Joanna. So it's so
Joni.
funny.
It's actually Joni,
Okay.
but it's okay. I'm going to answer to whatever you say.
I was born in Wales. I was a war baby. My father was an American GI who met my mother during the war. And she was they met at a pub called the Windsor Castle Hotel at a small town in Wales called Newport. And after the war, my father went back to Wales and married her. And they moved to the United States. And my mother wasn't happy. Moved back to Wales, where I was born, back to the United States, back to Wales, back to the United States. And that's where I grew up. From the age of 3 on, I grew up in New York City. And shortly after that, my mother died. I didn't know why she died. I was 7 years old at the time and didn't find out till I was in my 20s that she had committed suicide. But that set off perhaps the trajectory that my life had during those first few years of my life.
You were so young to lose your mom. I mean,
Yeah.
7. Wow.
And I thought it was my fault. All of a sudden, we were taken away from her actually before, my brother and I, older brother, and didn't know why. All of a sudden, we weren't living with my parents anymore. And, you're a stupid little kid. Nobody tells you anything. And so I didn't know what I had done. But then I didn't know if I'd ever see my parents again, or the toys that I had. That was the big deal, the toys. Whatever toys I had, I never saw them again. That was a big loss. My mother too, but the toys.
Peter, did you find out why they took you away? Was it because your mother had some kind of issues?
When I started really concentrating on finding my mother's story, which was maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I started writing about it and found my family in Wales, which I had lost a long time ago. And people were finally willing to talk. And my father was willing to talk before he died about 15 years ago. And my mother had gotten seriously depressed. My family in Wales was surprised at this. They hadn't seen her since she had been a young girl. She was happy. She was living in this bucolic area. And when I found out the story that she became, I call it a great sadness overwhelmed her. And also found out from my father that she began to drink heavily. And she would have, she kicked out my father as well, not just got rid of us, but kicked out my father. And she would have the grocery boy bring up alcohol to the apartment that she was living in. This was the early 1950s, along with the groceries. And so she just sank deeper and deeper. What I think the reason is, and I'm not sure about this, the only thing two things I've been trying to understand is that she had been born in Wales in the early 1920s. And the woman who was raised as her sister turned out to actually be her mother.
Oh.
And this was a matter of great shame in the little valley, the little village where she was from. And when she began to suspect this, the sister would never admit she was her mother. And what I found out from the relatives in Wales is that they had this blowout argument, the really fierce argument in 1953. She left Wales, and that was the last time she spoke with her family. And I think that's what led to her sadness and finally giving up on life.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. So, okay, so you're 7 years old, you and your brother. Who did you live with? Where did you go? Were you put in foster care or?
We were sent to a home in Staten Island. It was a Catholic boarding school, and it was, I believe very much. I was raised in the Catholic religion. Pardon me, and I believed the very strong vision of heaven and hell. I was learning about hell in school, and this place was so bad, and they beat me frequently. I thought I must be in hell, but I was confused because I didn't remember dying, and I thought you had to die to be in hell. It's just very
Mm,
confused. And so we were there for a while, and finally, after my brother and I, we ran away twice. We didn't get very far, and then an aunt took us in, and she lived in Queens. And one funny thing is that we were put in a public school, and at that time in the United States, they had prayer in public schools. And so it was very similar to the Catholic schools. We were saying different kinds of prayers. And I thought, okay, so I'm no longer a Catholic. I must be a public, that this was a new religion I belonged to. But I was very concerned because the Catholics talked about hell. So I knew what to do and what not to do to get out of Catholic hell. But the publics were very tricky. They didn't tell me about public hell. So I was afraid I was going to wind up in public hell without knowing what I did wrong. Um,
wow.
and so after a few years of having relative stability and living in public hell, fear of public hell, my father remarried. And so I was reunited with my father after, I guess, 3 or 4 years, and a stepmother and a new family. And things were okay, but then I was molested by a priest for about a year.
Ugh.
And again, the Catholic thing set in, and I figured, well, he's a priest, so he
How could he
can't.
be doing anything wrong?
So it must be me because it felt wrong. It felt wrong. It felt dirty, and I felt
So evil.
I must be the sinner here because it could not possibly be him. And I didn't know what I did wrong, but
And how old were you then, Peter?
I was 11. I was
Oh,
11, and it lasted on and off for about a year. Um, and
that's so messed up. Yeah, that's
it
so messed up.
yeah, but it was normal. I thought this. I didn't think anything was strange. I just figured, okay, whatever happened. But part of my warped idea is that because I knew I was constantly sinning, that I went to confession every Saturday. First of all, I would meet with the priest every Saturday morning. And then that afternoon, I would go to confession with the same priest. And I,
Wow.
I thought because I believed this so stringently, so directly, so literally that I thought maybe the best thing that could happen to me is to die on Saturday afternoon, right after I go to confession, because that way I knew I'd go to heaven. Um, so when I was about 15, I decided I don't think any of this makes any sense. And I also found out from one of the other kids in the neighborhood. He said, "Hey, did you know Father Smith was queer?" And I said, "No, it's impossible." And then it hit me because I understood what the words meant, and that is when I understood what had happened to me 4 years earlier. It made complete sense to me at that point.
Right.
And I decided, okay. And I began to question everything. And as I began to question life, question how I was raised, question how I was taught, question what I believed, I fell in love with two things. I fell in love with drinking, and I fell in love with poetry,
Mm.
which was a strange thing. And I didn't know anything about poetry. I hadn't read any poetry. I just started writing these. I actually started writing folk songs, parodies, and I ran out of parodies, and I started writing, and it wasn't a parody anymore. I thought, no, it must be a poem. And I didn't know anybody who did this, but I felt this was also going to get me in trouble. I can't share this with my friends; they'd beat me up. But it made sense to me. I was expressing myself, which nobody really cares. And but it meant something to me. I had nothing else in my life that really meant something to me. So I continued to do it, and I made a couple of stupid decisions, a couple more stupid decisions. So the first one was I decided I could either be Catholic or I could be happy, and I decided I want to be happy. So no more Catholicism. I questioned God, and I figured, well, God wasn't there for me. I'm not going to be there for God. I never heard the word agnosticism or atheism, but I think, probably more of an agnostic. And as the next few years of high school went on, and I drank more and more, and I began to write more and more and learn more about poetry, I realized, okay, I have to make another decision. I didn't think a poet could be happy. So I decided I could either be a poet or I could be happy. And I decided I'm going to be a poet. And I described that part of my life as early derelict period.
I
And
have to add an editorial comment, Peter. I'm sorry, but when you say you felt it was a stupid decision to leave the Catholic Church, based on your history with the Catholic Church, I wouldn't call it stupid. I maybe questionable in terms of the overall subject of your relationship with God, but at that moment, I can see why you'd make that decision.
yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
saying.
yeah, no, that's true. And I was also going to a Catholic high school, which didn't help. Yeah. So anyway, um,
Okay, so now
so
your derelict period is what you started to say.
that was early derelict period.
Okay.
And I was drunk most of the time when I was a senior in high school, and I scared myself so silly. I decided to stop drinking. I mean, I really got into a really bad thing, and I managed to stop for 3 weeks. And I will say that was the worst 3 weeks of my life until that point. And I said, okay, that's not working. So I started drinking again and managed to get into a college and flunked out and decided I need to get into another college where I'd be drafted. This was 1968 and flunked out. Got into a third college and flunked out and figured, all right. But then they came out the lottery system. So I drew a high number. And I call this period of my life mid-derelict period because I made what I thought was a smart decision after flunking out of 3 colleges. I went to work at a bar. And I know one of your other guests, I don't remember his name, Mike, I think who was a runner. He ran during his sobriety. He also talked about working in a bar. And
yeah, as an alcoholic. Yeah, right, questionable. Yeah.
I know he was saying that was a good decision. And I thought, well, it was a brilliant decision. That was mid-derelict period. That lasted for about 3 years, and I got in more and more trouble, and I had more and more blackouts. And I remember showing up at work one day and the boss was yelling at me and I said, I'm here on time. What are you yelling about? I said, no, you're a day late. I said, what do you mean I'm a day late? That's impossible. What day is it? He said, it's Wednesday. No, it's Tuesday. And I couldn't believe I lost a day like that. And that wasn't the first time. And I began to lose a lot of time like that. I got involved with a woman who came into the bar one night and she was a great dancer. And turns out that she said, we started talking. She came to my part of the bar and I was serving her drinks. And she was a professional dancer. I didn't know what kind of I figured, well, maybe ballet, but I found out later on she was a go-go dancer. Yeah. And she had just gotten out of a psychiatric hospital where she kicked a heroin habit. So I taught her to drink. So this became a very, very terrible relationship. And I don't want to give any impression that she ruined me. I think we were ruining each other at this point.
It was toxic. Relationship.
It was bad for both of us. And I kept breaking up with her and I would go back like 10 minutes later. It didn't work. We hit several negative points, but one of them is she got me, this is going to sound ridiculous, so forgive me for this, but it's true, $1,000 in debt to a mafia connected dentist. And yeah, I know. It's right. So here's how it happened. So we're at a movie theater, and this is the old days where they have the soda machine where the cup comes down and the ice and the syrup. You remember those? You remember them. The young people won't know what I'm talking about. And so in comes the ice and the syrup, and she sees a screw drops into the cup. And she picks up, I didn't see it, but she picks up the cup and starts drinking it and then starts screaming in the middle of the lobby. And then the movie manager comes over and she says, spits out the screw, you broke my tooth, blah, blah, blah. And he's all nervous. So we're filling out these insurance forms or something, a claim form. And we get into the car and I still don't know what's going on. And she says, you got to find me a dentist who's going to go along with this. We're going to make a lot of money. We're going to sue them. I was like, what? So I find her a dentist. Somebody where I work knows a dentist who will go along with this. And the bar that I was working, it was connected as well. There were people that came in. Big Ralph came in every week for an envelope of $400. And so anyway, the dentist decides to go along with this, and he fixes her teeth, he fixes my teeth, he gives us a bill for $1,000. And the girl completely forgets about this. She's no longer interested. The paperwork gets lost. And I keep getting phone calls from an associate of the dentist. Hey, you don't pay up, you don't do the right thing. So I got to a state where I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. So I ran away. What else would a man do except run away? So I ran away and I didn't know where to go. And so I knew I was born in Wales, but I didn't know anything about it because my mother died when I was so young. but I got myself a passport. I managed to get an address book from my father that was 20 years old of the connections. And I went to Wales. And when I got to London, I realized nobody on the entire continent knows what a fuck up I am. Nobody knows who I am. And maybe I can remake my life. Maybe I can change my life. And it worked for a little bit, but thus begins late derelict period. So 9 months later, I was living in a commune in Cardiff, Wales. I had found my family. I had made friends, and I was living in this commune. And my name was Gadney Morgan from Caerphilly. I had already, had this alias, and woke up not for the first time in a gutter, covered in my urine, and decided I was 21 years old. This is not how I know you call your podcast, the Addiction Podcast, the point of no return. This was the point. The night before, I was trying to kill myself. I had three decisions. I decided immediately to get my ear pierced, kill myself, or join this religion that I heard of in Ireland a few months earlier, but a new religion that seemed to make sense to me. And they all seemed about equal. Throw myself off the top of this building. No, I'll get my ear pierced. No, I'll join a religion. And so I decided, all right, let me try to kill myself by drinking. And, drinking even more. And so when I woke up the next morning, it didn't work. I was still alive. And decided to go to this meeting for this religion. And while I was there, I realized whether I liked it or not, I believed it, but I could never live up to their expectations. They believed in God and they didn't drink. And I thought, well, even the Catholics drink, And I was talking to one of the people, who had just given a talk, and he said, well, why don't you become part of us? Why don't you join us? And I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I can't live this life. And he said, if you believe it and don't join, you're more of a hypocrite than if you join and try to live it, but can't make up to it. And he just called me hypocrite. I had the shakes. I was waiting for the pubs to open around 11 in the morning. This was close to 11. And I started shaking even more that I realized he was right.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
I was terrified even more that if I joined this religion, I wouldn't drink. I mean, how does that even work? So in order to join the religion, there's no formal rituals or anything. You sign a card that says you believe in what it teaches. So I said, okay. So I tried signing the card, but I was shaking so badly, they asked me they couldn't read it. They said, would you mind signing a second one? All right. Then would you mind signing it a third time? And I said, I understand if you don't want me, but I'm not going to do it a third time. And they said, okay, we'll work it out. And so I realized that the people believed that God had sent a new messenger who was bringing new teachings that would unite the world. And I figured, all right, if I believe that what they're saying is true, that means I have to believe the teachings which say don't drink. I didn't know how to do that. And I never heard of 12 steps. I never heard of one day at a time. But I decided I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to go to the pub I was planning to go to. And I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but I'll worry about it tomorrow. And I didn't drink that day. And the next day I woke up and said, I don't know what to do, but I'm not going to drink today. And I'm not going to drink the next day. And I just worked it out. And I realized the religion also said you have to obey the law of the country you're living in. Well, I was there illegally for the last 8 months or 7 months. My visa expired. I didn't know I was still a British citizen. I had dual citizenship. I had no idea, which is why I changed my name to Gaddy Morgan. So they couldn't track me down if they were looking for Peter Murphy. um, so I returned to the United States and decided I had to try to become a better person, try to grow up, try to make friends with my family. And so I did. And I tried to, at that point, I was lucky enough to, I love the word fashion, to fashion a new life. And the thing that had led me, I left out a whole lot of details here, but the thing that led me to where I got to that point was poetry. It led me from place to place, literally in Britain, where I was learning more about poetry, and it guided me to place to place. And that sort of became what I wanted to do with my life, is somehow become a poet and teach poetry to others, and as a way of service, as a way of helping them to figure out their lives. So that's my story.
Wow. How long have you been sober?
Ah, my anniversary, coming up, my 50th anniversary,
Wow.
March 25th, 2022, which is one
Wow.
reason I reached out to you, is that I decided I think I needed to share my story. It's still tentative. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. I'm not going to drink today, but
I, you know, I applaud you because you've made it this far, and I understand that it's one day. I like to say that there's a gentleman that I follow on Instagram, and he lives on the Isle of Man, and every day he posts and he says today is day number 520, and then he'll put something in there, and then tomorrow he'll go today is day number 521,
wonderful.
and it's if that works for you, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. So okay, so you went back to the U.S. Did you have to do anything about the mafia money, or did that kind of go
Yeah,
away?
that was the first thing I did, was pay them off.
Oh, okay, okay. So
It took me over a year,
you
but I called up and I said, "Look, I'm sorry. Please don't break my legs.
yeah, I'll pay.
I'll pay." And I did. I paid the VIG, which is the interest. Well, I don't even remember what it was now. It was 50 years ago, but I did. That was the first thing I did.
Okay, okay, good. So now you're not worried about someone
I'm not
coming and
worried about
breaking your
that.
legs.
We
So
worked out an agreement. So
so were you then working as a poet? Were you publishing?
no,
How was that going?
yeah. Well, what did I do in my life at that point? I worked as a bartender. I had several part-time jobs, and I had worked construction. Um, and I knew I didn't want to go back to the bar, because that I knew I was not going to be able to make it. And I didn't want to hang out with most of my old friends, because that was the life I was trying to
Right.
leave. So I was able to get a job working construction, operating heavy equipment through my father. And I worked for 1 week, and then the union went out on strike
Oh,
for 6 months. So I drove a cab around Manhattan, and that turned out to be good. It was um, romantic and frustrating and stressful all at the same time. The Harry Chapin song, I don't know if you remember the song Taxi from back in the early 70s, had just come out, about a taxi driver who has this romance and sees this girl from years before, and she gives him a $20 tip. Anyway, so that's sort of what added to it. But when I went back to work at construction, it was a way of earning money. And my goal was to move out of New York City, which to me I had to do in order to help maintain my sobriety. And I didn't even know the word sober, just so I could help not drinking, not talking not being with the people. And I needed a job, I needed money, and that was my goal. And I did it for the next 3 or 4 years, on and off, mostly on. And I was working at one job in central Manhattan, and went into a bookstore and picked up a book called Wishes, Lies, and Dreams, Teaching Poetry Writing to Children, by a fellow named Kenneth Koch. And I read this book and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to teach poetry writing to children. But what do I have to do? I have to go to
hmm.
college. And I didn't think I could do that. I flunked, I was not good at this. But I decided I have a new life. I have this spiritual background. I'm really trying to understand. I have these people. I've been going to meetings with this new religion in Manhattan. There was a Baha'i center there. There was Baha'i faith. I'm not sure if you're
Okay.
familiar with
Uh,
it.
I didn't ask you, but yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for clarifying. Yeah.
yeah. And there was a Baha'i center there, and they had a lot of young people. And I had a car. So after I would drive around the city in my cab, and after working construction a day, I would go and pick up some of the other Baha'i young people and would drive to meetings. And I would ask them questions. I would try to understand what I was reading in the Baha'i book, but I needed to talk. So I was getting lessons from these other people who knew what they were talking about. And I decided I'm going to try this college thing again. So I decided Queens College, let me go there. And one of the things I read in the Baha'i writings is that agriculture is important. So I figured, let me start with agriculture. I didn't know what agriculture was. I mean, I didn't have much of an education.
In New
Right?
York City, I know.
So that's exactly what they said.
Yeah.
They said, what do you want to study, kid? I said, agriculture. They said, do you see any farms around here? I said, no, what does that have to do with agriculture? So I felt totally humiliated and wanted to get out of there as quickly as I can. I said, what do you have that's close? So the guy says, geology. So I registered for geology and I took geology and it made sense. My name, Peter, means rock. And all of a sudden I fell in love with this. The rocks, everything was logical. It was the first science course I had ever taken. I took it for a whole year and I got A's. And I loved it. But I realized also if I was going to pursue this, I need to take real sciences like, biology and chemistry. And I knew I couldn't do that. The embarrassing part, there's so much of this is embarrassing. I can talk about it now, but I also had to take a writing placement test. And I think no problem. I'm a writer, right? And I failed it so miserably. I was put in the lowest level composition class where I was one of 3 native English speakers. And I was very, this has got to be a mistake. So I went to the head of the English department and they said, obviously you made a mistake. Let me look. He looked at my paper and they said, no, you belong there.
Oh, no.
It was bad. But I realized after sitting there like this for a few weeks that, wait a minute, I don't know what that is. And I started paying attention. I realized I was full of crap. I didn't know I called myself a writer, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so I managed at the end of the year to get an A in that course as well. And I decided, okay, I can do this college thing. And so I was going to college at night for a couple of years and working construction in the day. And then tragedy happened. I fell in love.
Tragedy?
Tragedy,
oh, no.
yeah. I know. Well, that's always a bad sign. My history had been bad. So anyway, so I was with going to a Baha'i conference out in Oklahoma City. And I was with another young Baha'i woman who was a poet, and we were reading our poems back and forth. And there was a woman sitting across the aisle, also going to the same conference, and she was listening and said, "Oh, I love poetry." And we got married a year and a day later. And she didn't love poetry; she'd lie to her teeth. But that's the only lie I've ever known her to tell. We've been married almost 50 years, 48 years. I'm not sure if it's going to last, but so far so good.
So not so much a tragedy.
No, not at all. But I like to joke around that, about that.
That's funny. That is a funny story. You guys have kids?
We have a daughter who is now I'm now a grandfather. My daughter was probably the best thing that happened in my life. She's just wonderful and has been a great spirit and a great companion, and a model for me how to live my life. I mean, which is really great, a balance. And my grandson is 3 years old. Oh, we did have an argument though. His name is Will.
Okay.
And I wanted him named after Wordsworth, William Wordsworth. And she said, no, he's named after William Shakespeare. And so we argued about this. And she said, so in my mind, it's still Wordsworth,
Okay.
He doesn't care. He's just named Will as far as he knows. But
Exactly.
I'll tell him what an evil person his mother is later on. So he's old enough to understand.
Well, I applaud you for your 50 years now. Are you teaching now? Are you teaching poetry to young people? That was part of your goal.
I spent college number 5, graduated from, and I finally had the guts to major in literature, which I did. And I taught English and creative writing at Atlantic City High School in the coast of New Jersey here for 29 years.
Wow.
And, had many, many students who went on to become writers, who are poets themselves, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, teachers, professors. And so sort of a lucky guy. And a lot of them stay in touch. I mean, it's like, hey, leave me alone. No, but they keep going and they send emails. They tell me about what they're doing. They ask how I'm doing. They're sort of like this local parentis. They're looking after me all the time. And so I retired from that, but then I'd also been adjuncting at Stockton University nearby, teaching whatever I wanted to. Composition I started at first, and then teaching creative writing classes. And on my own, I started teaching workshops for teachers and other writers about maybe 30 years ago, more than that. And one of the things I had trouble with when I was teaching full time is how do I find time to write? And most writers have trouble with that. And there's jobs that get in the way, and this awful thing, families that get in the way. They want to be with you. And it's so hard. So I in the mid 80s and early 90s, for a number of summers, I went to artist colonies to write. And it's wonderful. You spend a month writing and they bring you food and you don't have to worry about anything. The trouble is when you go home, nobody does that. You have to go to work, you have to cook your own food, to be with that. So I decided back, I guess, around 1989 or 90, I started renting a hotel room one weekend a month. And I went away and I created my own little artist colony. And it worked. And I began to publish more and more. And I was writing stuff that I liked. And I was doing more workshops. And as I was doing more workshops, people said, well, how do you find time to write? And I said, I rent a hotel room one week a month. And so people said, I wish I could go with you. And after hearing this enough, I stupidly made the decision, let me bring people with me one time. So I rented a block of hotels at a resort town on the Jersey shore called Cape May, New Jersey. And invited people to come with me. And I called it the Winter Poetry Getaway. And I was hoping to get 15 people or I was going to lose a lot of money. And I had 20.
Oh, wow.
I know. It's like, oh, okay. And the following year, I was going to do it again. But then people that said, I don't write poetry, I write prose. Can I come? So I said, well, all right. So I called it the Winter Poetry and I put and prose in parentheses. And they didn't like the parentheses part. So we did it a third year and got without the parentheses. So it went from 20 people the first year to within 7 years, over 200.
Wow.
And I had no time to write anymore because I was doing this all the time when I wasn't teaching full time. And then when I retired, I brought my daughter on, that brilliant young woman I was mentioning a few years ago. And I figured she was really smart. She could file and stuff like that. Well, no, she was smarter than that. We wound up growing it even more. We started doing workshops up and down the Eastern Coast in Florida and New Hampshire and Europe.
Wow.
And no more time to write anymore.
Oh.
And about 7 years ago, Stockton University made an offer that they wanted to acquire Murphy Writing. And so we didn't know what that meant. I never heard of a university acquiring a private business, but we negotiated and they now at Stockton University, Murphy Writing of Stockton University, and they hired myself, my daughter, and the other employees that I had. And now it's been a good match. So that's what.
Wow. Well, congratulations on the success of that.
Thank you. It's strictly an accident because I didn't mean to do it. As I mentioned, it's just like, okay, well, these people want to come with me for a weekend.
You did what you did what you were passionate about. And I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, you'd gotten clean and sober and you found your passion and you kind of moved ahead with it. And typically when you do that, other people want to follow along because they admire it. I admire it.
No, thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're
Yeah.
welcome. And you're writing a memoir?
Right. It's I'd been what happened in I mentioned earlier that I found out my mother had killed herself. And it was about 2 years after I got sober.
Okay.
And at that point, my father had gotten sober recently as well. He had been a lifelong drinker. His father had been his father before him. I can go back to my great grandfather on my mother's side, father's side, and my great grandparents on my mother's side, alcohol on all ends. And my father had a heart attack and decided to change his life. So he stopped drinking. And we had our first conversation as adults. And I asked about my mother. I said, well, what was she like and what happened? And it's when he told me she killed herself. And I was so shaken. I had no idea that I buried it. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't tell my wife that this happened. And that sort of thing doesn't stay buried. So after about 15 years or 12 years at that point, two things happened. I started to have drinking dreams, which I've been sober now for almost 15 years. And all of a sudden wake up in the middle of the night and I want to drink. And it scared the hell out of me. And I started dreaming about my mother and she wanted me to pay attention too. So it was either start drinking or do something else. So I started writing and I started writing about it in poetry. And the thing about poetry, it can disguise it with myth and fairy tales and other stuff like that. And I did that and that seemed to work. I was discovering a lot because as a kid, I wanted to write to express myself. But when I realized that's, nobody really cares, I didn't really care. I started writing to discover and reveal and understand. And it's what writing can do. The process of not just writing what you know, but writing to explore. And I have a friend who's a terrible friend. She wanted me to do more. And she's wanted me to write a memoir. And so I said, all right, after she nagged me for a couple of years. So I started writing a memoir, and I figured I don't have to be in my own memoir. This is about my parents. It's their story. So I called it D-Day, A Love Story. And so after a couple of years, she asked to read part of it. And she said, where were you in the story? I said, I'm not in the story. She said, why not? I said, well, I don't want to be in my memoir. So she called me on it again. And I tried again. And the new version was called You Go to My Head. And it comes from the title of a jazz standard from World War II that was popular in Europe at the time, in Britain. And it's about the intoxication of love and alcohol. And I figured this is a good theme. And so I worked with that for a number of years and got to a point where I just didn't know where to go next. And so the new title became Next. And worked on that for about a year or two. And the final title, the one that I know this is the good title, is called Once Upon a Time You Lived in a Castle. And it incorporates several things. One is this sort of fairy tale aspect, the little boy growing up without a parent, like in all the Walt Disney movies, the mother dies and, the evil stepmother and all this other stuff. The mythical past, there's all of the forests that he has to go through to kill the monsters and demons. And then the literal part, I mentioned earlier that the pub where my parents met was called the Windsor Castle Hotel. Mm-hmm. So there really is a castle. Mm-hmm. And when I returned to Wales, when I was 20 years old that time, that's the first place I went in Wales, was to the Windsor Castle Hotel. And of course, nobody knew who they were. I did find my family at that time. And over the years, I keep going back to the Windsor Castle Hotel in order to try to, get a feeling about my mother. And I was even able to convince the new owners to let me go upstairs into the apartment where I lived.
Oh, wow.
And the place was a ramshackle. It was a real mess. It was falling apart. Mm-hmm. But I was able to do that. And it was just lovely just to be there. And I felt close to my mother, even though she hadn't been there in 70 years, how many years. But it was a connection. And my earliest memory, when I was about 3, was being up there, looking out. I was standing on a piano bench, looking out the window down at these men loading kegs of beer into the pub. They were rolling it down. And I was fascinated. And I didn't see there's a woman. I just still don't know who the woman is. Sneaked up behind me. I thought she snuck up and smacked me on the bottom and yelled at me for standing on the piano bench. And it's my earliest memory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think about why do I remember that, from almost 70 years ago? And I think, well, this is a long shot. This is probably not true, but it's my imagination. It works. 3 streams that had gone through my early life was trouble with women, trouble with violence, and trouble with alcohol. Mm-hmm. So why not? All 3 of those in that one little anecdote.
Very cool. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I mean, great on your career, but even more great on almost, by the time this goes up, basically 50 years clean and sober. I know it's not easy. But you're doing it one day at a time, and that's kind of the way it has to go. And, you're helping others write and be creative. And, I love that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thanks for having me, and bless you.
Thank you so much for listening today. I thought Peter's story was a good one in that it's an inspiring story. It breaks my mother's heart to hear about what he went through as a child, and no child should have to go through that. And anyway, he pulled out of the alcoholism. He's almost 50 years clean and sober. And, he's really turned his life around, and he's helping other people, achieve their goals in terms of writing. So it's a good story. I hope that it gives you some kind of inspiration that sobriety is possible and that you can absolutely turn your life all the way around. And if it's not you that's addicted, if it's a loved one, they can turn their life around. However, if they're not reaching that point of no return on their own, and you're not reaching it on your own, you need to reach out for help, okay? There are interventionists, there are organizations, there are churches. You can get help, but you have to ask for it. We'll be back again next week. We're closing in on the end of our 5th year. Thank you so much for listening.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is The Addiction Podcast at yahoo.com.